Hello and welcome to Light from Light. Today I'm joined by a good friend, Dr. Sara Parvis of the University of Edinburgh fame. I first met you, I think, was it 2 years ago now? Uh,
Three
just
years ago.
after it was just after I was ordained, and I was newly assigned to Edinburgh to be university chaplain to three universities, one of which was the University of Edinburgh, where you teach. But I was also made the provincial promoter for the lay Dominicans, and of course, you're not only the formation officer for the lay Dominicans in our province, but also you are the president of the Edinburgh lay fraternity. So actually, I spent a lot of time with you, and you were very, very kind in taking me out for porridge and all sorts of things in the cold, atmospheric winter of Scotland. But yes, thank you very much for coming on. One of the things that happened in my second year, which I always find a nice story, is there was a student who'd come from Spain. And I think I've told you this before many times, I'm sure. There was a student who came from Spain, Jose, and I said, "Oh, you come from Spain. What brings you to, deepest, darkest Scotland, And he said, I really wanted to study under Dr. Sara Parvis. And then out came this whole story about how essentially your name is like a shibboleth in Spain, where if you're really interested in patristics in Spain, then you have to know you have to know your work, right? You have to know the work of Sarah for our viewers. um, and if you're like, otherwise you're just sort of cosplaying. If you take patristics seriously, you have to know Sarah's work. And your doctorate was on Marcella van Syra.
Marcella Savansara, yes.
Marcellus van Syra. Very good. Thank you very much. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the Council of Nicaea, because it's a big anniversary for Nicaea, 1,700 years, if I'm not mistaken. And so maybe we should begin there. Like what? Well, actually, for those people who are watching this video who don't know what a church council is, or I mean, what distinction can we make a distinction between church councils in general, like local church councils and ecumenical councils? And if so, what would be the difference between the two, would you say?
Well, this is a really interesting question because that's what Nicaea started off. Nicaea is the first of the ecumenical councils, and they were still.
Would you say Jerusalem was the first ecumenical council? I hear that a lot.
People sometimes say that, but it's not counted as an ecumenical council in the way that the history of dogma is taught. I mean, Jerusalem is a fascinating council. I mean, I think it's wonderful, and really, really interesting. I think that you can say that it established baptism as what makes you a Christian. But I'm not a New Testament scholar. That sort of thing is very much debated among New Testament scholars. But Nicaea is the moment at which Christianity goes large. I mean, you're somebody I know. You love the expression "go large or go home."
Go big or go home. Go big or go home. Yeah,
The moment when Christianity goes big, in the sense that you've never had all the bishops from all over the East and a number from the West as well, all come together in the same place at the same time. And it wasn't called ecumenical at the time. But it came to be afterwards, because an awful lot of what happened at Nicaea, or what happens after Nicaea, really up until now, is trying to make sense of what Nicaea actually meant, what it actually was. So the term ecumenical in Greek, oikomenos, simply means the inhabited world. And although the Romans mainly meant the Roman Empire by that, they didn't just mean the Roman Empire. So there were people from outside. There was a bishop from among the Goths who was present at Nicaea, and there were also some bishops from Persia, as it was then. So an ecumenical council. The term is sort of established at the Council of Sardica 18 years after Nicaea, and it's a way of saying both the east and west of the empire. And that was a period when the east and the west of the empire, the Roman Empire, were ruled by different emperors who to some extent disagreed with one another, two of Constantine's sons. But I'd like to pull back, if I might, and talk about Nicaea today, talk about why you might be interested in studying, talking about Nicaea today, why your viewers might like to be part of this conversation, because it's a 1700-year conversation about the Council of Nicaea. It's a conversation that's sprung into life again this year because of the anniversary, obviously. And it's the only conversation I can think about that's that old, that continuous, that matters all across the world and is that deeply historical, is live, is then and now, and has all sorts of implications for the future. So I'd like to, if I can, talk a little bit about what the significance of the conversations that are going on this year are about it. Then go back and talk about Nicaea itself, what happened in 325, talk about what was theologically significant about it, and talk about what was ecclesiologically significant about it. Does that work?
Yeah, no, that sounds really, really great. Yeah. Away you go.
Okay, so this year, obviously, I've been taking part in a lot of conversations, and everybody who specialises in and writes on the Council of Nicaea has taken part in a lot of conversations on this. And I think probably a lot of us were quite bored with the topic before we started the year. And we got enthused again because of all the people who wanted to know about this. And of course, the first thing you have to know is that the Nicene Creed, the creed that all Catholics and many other Christians throughout the world say every week, is not the creed that was promulgated at Nicaea in 325. It was a creed that was promulgated, well, not promulgated, but drawn up in Constantinople at 381. Came to be called the Nicene Creed, and we could come back to that. But there are a couple of elements of it that were during the that were agreed during the Council of Nicaea in 325. The phrase "true God from true God" and the term homoousios, which consubstantialum in the accusative in Latin, which is being translated, currently translated consubstantial with the Father, of the relationship between the Father and the Son, or previously it was translated of one being, or of one substance, it's sometimes translated. So I'll come back to that. But I want to talk a little bit about your original question about councils, what it felt like to be at Nicaea, because you have to remember that there'd just been the most concerted attempt to completely wipe Christianity out that there had ever been up to that time, the Diocletian persecution, which had gone on and on, particularly in the East. And so it had only finished when Licinius, the Emperor Licinius in the East, had, in 313, had put an end to it, put an end to the sort of third installment of it under the Emperor Maximinus. And so when he began to look as though he was persecuting the church again towards the end of his reign, everybody was really terrified. You know, it's déjà vu, it's all going to happen again. Now, while all that was going on, there were a lot of doctrinal debates going on and also a lot of fights among the bishops. So Nicaea is a whole lot of different things at once. It's on the one hand a celebration of the church still being there, and this is the sort of picture you get from Eusebius of Caesarea's Life of Constantine. That and for Eusebius of Caesarea, it's a great imperial achievement by the Emperor Constantine. So you get the bishops. I mean, he concentrates on the great banquet, the great dinner they had afterwards. Eusebius of Caesarea didn't really like the creed and the anathemas, although he did sign up to them. But he talks about how astonishing it was that the bishops walked into the inner sanctum to the banqueting chamber and were ushered in by guards. And of course, these are the same guards that would have been torturing and executing some of these people themselves, like the Bishop Paphnutius, but also whose feast day we celebrated last Thursday, or I celebrated it anyway, because it also happens to be my wedding anniversary. But the bishops who'd either themselves suffered during the Diocletian persecution or whose predecessors had suffered and who now venerated them as martyrs. So it was this sense of rebirth and a new life and coming together of the church for some people. It was a sense of, I mean, Constantine was a game changer in Christianity, although exactly how that happens is quite a complex question. And at the same time, the bishops who were more focused on the theology of the incarnation, and we'll come back to that, particularly the bishops of Egypt, bishops of Alexandria, were probably in many cases feeling a bit sick, a bit and deeply unhappy, because effectively a council which they had planned, which would have been kind of a local council, although quite a big local council in Ancyra in Asia Minor, had been hijacked as far as they were concerned, taken to the imperial palace in Nicaea, and had been run under the aegis of Constantine, who had stopped them deposing the bishops they wanted to depose. And instead made them all make peace with each other. Now, the ingredients of all of that, and all of that is pretty uncontroversial, but scholars, both Christians and classicists, agnostic, atheist, Christian, anything else, Jewish, all agree on those basic facts. But of course, we all like to fight about the significance of them. Now, I'll come back to the question of Eusebius of Caesarea's account versus Athanasius' account, Athanasius of Alexandria's account, and those are the two great accounts of the council that survive. But let me park all that for a minute and come back to the conversations that we've all been having this year. Because the Council of Nicaea is a way of having an argument that's not about individuals, but about community. So most of the arguments that happen, I suppose, on the internet, happen on social media, happen when people gather in pubs or coffee houses or wherever they gather to talk about theology, which, of course, we all do all the time.
Let me tell you, in the doctor's pub, they speak of nothing else about the Nicene controversies.
I mean, there must be somebody somewhere in the world that doesn't talk about theology all the time, but I don't actually know anybody who does.
I don't know very many people yet.
Yeah. We're both a bit niche, let's admit it. But so a lot of my conversations have been with Protestants, because I work at New College, where I work. It was founded by originally the Free Church of Scotland, and then which joined together mostly with the Church of Scotland. So it's now the theology faculty of the University of Edinburgh, but it also trains Church of Scotland ministers. And as part of the sort of wider Reformed network, I've been part of a whole series of conversations about just what the status of Nicaea should be for those churches. You can, for the Reformed tradition, which is the tradition that goes a stage further than Luther and then the Anglicans, the Calvinist tradition, although Calvin wasn't the only theologian from that tradition. Scripture is the standard of everything, and you can have subordinate standards, and they can include creeds, but they're subordinate to Scripture. So I've been part of a whole lot of really interesting conversations about just how far should the Reformed tradition espouse the Nicene Creed. Now, part of that is so the World Council of Reformed Churches is having a conversation about this, and I wrote a piece for a book that they published on this, because you have the right wing and left wing Reformed churches, if you like, and one move that's often made is a dislike of Nicaea for what I would consider very much the wrong reasons. I mean, you can dislike Nicaea if you like, but dislike it on the basis of the facts, I would say. So you can think that Nicaea is far too imperial. You could spin this line that it's Western, that it's Greek philosophy, that what's this got to do with Asian Christianity or African Christianity or Latin American Christianity? We all believe in liberation, don't we? So why should we feel liberated by something that was imposed by an emperor and was simply a matter of politics? And that's a line that a lot of people will come out with, that you get other people who just hate the whole idea of condemning people for heresy, who just think, what's Christian about that? Hey, live and let live. Can't we all believe whatever we want? And the great thing about Nicaea and the Nicene conversations is it lets you debate all these on the basis of what happened in the 4th century. There are quite a few interesting moments at which, and I'll talk in a minute about the Homoean Creed, the Creed of 360, which said that Jesus was like the Father according to the Scriptures. Hey, you can't get more liberal than that, can you? Let it all hang out. But it was really just a stalking horse, a Trojan horse, I should say, for some really very radical views, arguing that Christ wasn't really God at all. Now, it's a really good way to see how some of these questions work and how the questions of reception work. So, as I say, I've taken issue a bit with the left wing. So I've written an article about why the Nicene Creed, the original Nicene Creed of 325, is from Africans, by Africans, for Africans. So against that idea that is European philosophical head stuff and who needs to know about that. No, it was actually the Egyptians who wanted to know about that. And the Ethiopic church is one of the first churches to sign up to be a Nicene church from its very beginning. So there's that side of it. There's also the question of feminism. So you get a lot of people who say, well, this is all about bishops, it's all about men, where are the women, what's going on? So having spent the first third of the year, if you like, debating about standards of faith and confessions with Reformed churches, a quick side bet in Cordova, debating about whether Osius of Cordova is really a saint. The answer is he is, but I've still got to write down the written version of the paper I gave that shows that. And having spent the next period looking at Nicaea as an African council and why this matters to African churches, I'm now going to go on for the other papers I'm giving for the rest of the year are on women in Nicaea and why, effectively the question of were women more fighting than fought over in the reception of Nicaea. And that's for another occasion, but that's a really interesting debate as well. So there are all kinds of modern debates you can have, if you like. Now, you can also have debates about the relations between the churches. There are lots of fascinating ecumenical debates you can have with Lutherans and Anglicans. And again, you both sort of branches of those, if you like, both the branches that think it's a great thing that you have emperors and rulers who take charge and tell you what the way forward is and try to produce compromise and peace. And, isn't that what we're all looking for? And also Lutherans and Anglicans who say, well, no, that was a previous generation, and now we're precisely very suspicious of these things, precisely because we've seen some of the directions that they can go in. So there are lots and lots of fine-grained modern conversations which are brought to life in ecumenical terms by talking about Nicaea. But also there are lots of fine-grained conversations then within scholarship as well. So before I go on to that, I just check, is there anything that you'd want to ask or that wasn't clear or that you want to argue with about the sort of modern side of why a worldwide conversation between churches about 1700-year-old council is the right thing to do?
I mean, I think we'd both agree that it also comes down to, truth, that truth matters and that living in accordance with the truth is actually a good thing and a positive thing for the common good for all. So the doctrinal element of Nicaea is also really important for Christians to discuss and show over, because I mean, it's true to say that even still today, Nicaea has its opponents, and the declaration at Nicaea has its opponents. And Athanasius, who's a great hero for, Catholics and Orthodox especially, Athanasius still even now has his opponents, And this really, it reminds me of a lot of, yeah, I mean, amongst students, very often what you'll find, then they're not arguing about Nicaea, right? They're all on board with Nicaea. Like they would find it really bizarre that anybody would question Nicaea on the whole, and they'd be very dismissive of people who don't accept Nicaea. However, when it comes to the latest ecumenical council, when it comes to the Second Vatican Council, you do see a lot more debate amongst the students, and there is almost this latent belief that this is the only council that has ever had any controversy after it that's gone on that long. And talking about actually Nicaea and how there are still people who call themselves Christians who have a really big problem with Nicaea, inexplicably, in my view. I think it just goes to, show that actually it's more complex and complicated than people would want to want to posit, you know. So from my perspective, talking amongst a lot of the students or the young ones and the people who are sort of still negotiating with the Second Vatican Council and the implementation of the council, um, there are things from Nicaea, I think, which can be brought to bear on that discussion, and they would never truck any opposition to Nicaea. They would never um, they wouldn't put up with it, right? They wouldn't put up with that sort of opposition. However, when it comes to something like the Second Vatican Council, oh, everything's much more nuanced. Everything's much more nuanced, and so yeah, I think that's something that I think people need to remember. I think that sort of anyway.
Yeah. I mean, nuance
But
is a good thing, though. Let's say that. I mean,
at
the
least
point
they're
of the
chewing over it, right?
yeah,
At
exactly.
least the conversation is happening. Yeah,
The point of theology is to talk about God, and that brings us all closer to God. And the point of, including the point of ecumenical theology, theology between different churches and even interfaith conversations, is all to talk about God and to sift through what we understand, to sift through both the reason and our love, the reasons for our love, and what we understand God to be calling us to, who we understand God to be.
yeah.
Now, obviously, Nicaea is, so let's get back now to the history. But I did just want to say that point about nuance, that it's not wrong to have a nuanced view of Vatican II, but some people have an ahistorical view, as you said, of what's normal
Yeah.
following a council. And that
Yeah.
precisely it does take often 2-3 generations after a council to
How
kind
many generations are we after Nicaea and Constantinople?
of...
And you know, I think, for example, about the controversy about the date of Easter, and
Yeah.
hundreds of years later. So people might say like, oh well, you know, look, there is this opposition to the date of Easter, and this sort of shows that, you know, the papacy didn't have the sort of authority that, you know, people after Vatican I claimed that they had. Well, actually, would we not just rather say that, well, they were wrong, and they were proud, and they had no legitimacy
Mm.
in opposing this. Similarly, the opponents of Nicaea, from a Catholic perspective, again, there isn't that same legitimacy there. And sure enough, after a few hundred years, the Easter controversy died down, and it was, you know, up until the separation between East and West and the new calendar sort of coming in, uh, then you have a slightly different Easter controversy based on the calendar rather than other things. So a lot of these debates and disagreements can persist for quite some time, but that doesn't mean that one is entitled to not receive something as given by the church, right? But still, that conversation is important and can be had.
I mean, Easter is particularly complex question, but one thing it gave us in the 4th century was Athanasius's Festal Letters, which is because he writes because they carry on being debates about the date of Easter between East and West and different churches in the 4th century. So Athanasius makes sure he always writes to the different churches of Egypt, telling them, I mean, the 1 or 2 years he doesn't manage it because he's in exile, but telling them when the date of Easter is and giving them sort of exhortation at the time. And those letters are really, really helpful, well, both for historians for making sense of Athanasius's life, but also for giving you a sense of the pastoral side of Athanasius, because it's very easy just to read his doctrinal works. And some people are scandalized by the rudeness of some of his works. I mean, some people, even John Henry Newman, found Historia Arianorum, the history of the Arians, which is so rude and calls Constantius the Antichrist and so on, found that a bit much. Whereas I think it was absolutely justified in the circumstances. I think, you know, that it was at that point, Athanasius thought he was going to die. I think it was the lowest point of his life, and he just wanted the story to be told. He was, according to later legend, dressed as a nun at this point, hiding out among nuns. There was a price on his head. Everybody wanted to kill him, or the Emperor Constantius wanted to kill him. And he writes this long list, which is mostly focused on other people, not himself, and the way in which they were ill-treated by Constantius. He wants the stories of what he sees as the martyrs of confessors for Nicaea to be known. and he puts down his pen at the end, pretty sure they're going to get him. And instead, it's Constantius who dies, and Athanasius rises, if you like, after that third, not technically an exile, but he was in hiding because he knew they were after him. And it's he who then draws together all the supporters of Nicaea, but that's another story. So going back to Nicaea itself, I mean, your point about truth, I think, is a very important one, and I want to pick up this point, that the key theological point about Nicaea, why we should care, and this is a Catholic point, really, and many other Christians too. It is a point of difference with classicists in many cases. So classicists, not surprisingly, not unreasonably, think it's all about politics. Nicaea was not the first time that the doctrine of the Incarnation was clearly set out. I mean, it's there, to my mind, fairly clearly in Paul already, and obviously John's Gospel. It's very, very clearly spelt out in Irenaeus at the end of the 2nd century in his Against the Heresies. And it's worth noting this whole question of why you need to exclude heresies. Why do you need anathemas? Why do you need to say, if you say this opinion, you do not belong in the church, or this opinion does not belong in the church? And it's Irenaeus who gives us the answer to that, which is, take Marcion, who came to Rome and tried to give the Roman Church a vast amount of money, which, the Mirabile Dictu, you might say they had the integrity to turn down, because he wanted the church to preach that there were two gods, one good God and one evil God. And that was in the 140s. So Irenaeus is basically saying, yes, you did the right thing then, and now do the same thing with the Gnostics. What they're doing is not Christianity either. This whole kind of notion of the pairs of gods, I won't go into Gnosticism, but that their view of Christ, I mean, for Irenaeus, and this is also very crucial still in the 4th century, Christ suffered, and any theology, any Christology, which involves Jesus not suffering, but if you like, only pretending to suffer, only pretending to be human, is not the gospel. It's not the good news, because how would it be good news for Christians who have seen their friends die under torture, which he had, and which obviously the bishops at Nicaea had? Why is it good news to believe in a Christ who didn't really suffer himself? So that's already established towards the end of the 2nd century. So the fact that you do need to rule out some theological positions, to my mind, is very clear, and it's very clearly worked out in 3rd century. So it's just a question of fighting over which positions are heretical and which ones aren't. So by the time you get to Nicaea, that's what this is about. And the two Christologies, therefore, that you're fighting over, Arius' Christology and the Christology of those who follow him, is this idea that Christ is God but not true God. So if you like, a sort of secondary God, a subordinate God. I mean, other people, even Justin Martyr, uses the phrase second God, but they don't mean by it what Arius is very clear what he means by it, that the Son is later in time than the Father. He is he's not eternal, and there was when he was not, is Arius' great phrase, and some of the other bishops follow him on that. Even Eusebius of Caesarea basically believes the Son is secondary in time, or at least there is when he is not. So
Is this
Yeah.
just very quickly? Is this because essentially they think to say that the Father and the Son are of one substance would be to or to say that Christ, would they basically see that as dividing the Godhead? Is that what
Yes.
they're worried about?
So Arius outlines 3 positions.
Essentially, you'd have 2 gods instead of 1
Yeah,
God, and
he
Scripture
has
is very
3
clear. There's 1
positions
God.
that he disagrees with. So
Yeah.
he says there are 3 possibilities, all of which are wrong, that his opponents believe in. He says either you believe in 2 ungenerated gods, and everybody agrees that doesn't work in that sense. That the 2 gods who have nothing to do with each other, that just happen to be existing eternally from eternity. Or so that's Arius's first group, a sunageneton, somebody who's generated alongside the Father. Or he says you have to believe that the Son split in two like an amoeba, effectively, so that the Son is a probole, is somebody who's stuck out from the Father, or he's a broken off piece of the Father. So all those three positions, Arius thinks you're a Gnostic if you have the view that you either have to think the Son is a broken off piece of the Father, that he's split in two like an amoeba, or you have to think there were always two and they don't really have any relationship to each other. So Arius thought that the Son was, as my husband Paul always used to say, zapped into being out of nothing. Arius uses the phrase out of nothing, but zapped into being is obviously not.
So essentially, for Arius, Jesus is created rather than begotten.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And he thinks of that in terms of temporality.
Yeah. He would say begotten, but he would mean by begotten later in time. And he wouldn't mean of the essence, because he thinks that's Gnostic. He thinks, got this kind of idea of a substance breaking in two. So he had explicitly ruled out the term homoousios, consubstantial. Now, there are various replies to that various different people make, but they're all to do with the essential point about Nicaea, certainly for me, is that the Son is not some kind of subordinate being sent to do the dirty work in the incarnation. So the incarnation is really the fully generous God having the full generosity to come and become one of us and suffer on the cross. So it's not, when God sends his Son, he's not a child abuser, because it is God's self who's coming and generously doing this. So the incarnation absolutely depends on the Son being true God. Now, Athanasius puts this by saying that if the Son were not truly saved, were not eternal, he couldn't save us. So for Athanasius, salvation is stability, that we all belong to this world which is rotting and falling apart, this world of chance and change, this world of unpredictability. And what we need to be saved from, what we need is eternity. We need the gift of eternity, of eternal salvation, of being with God eternally, in order to escape that. So the eternal loss is eternal fragmentation and disintegration, and eternal salvation is to last, is to be forever with God, contemplating God. And for him, only someone who had that gift of eternity can give that gift of eternity. So it's a theology of adoption for Athanasius, that what Christ is naturally, Christ being natural Son of God, confers adoption on all of us and makes us adopted children of God. So gives us freely what he already has, but does that by becoming one of us and sharing in our nature so that we can share in his nature.
So what you're not saying, just to clarify, you're not saying that Athanasius is an adoptionist and thinks that
not in that sense.
No, not in that sense, right? That he's eternally begotten of the Father.
And we're the ones who are adopted.
Yes, that we are adopted, and he is the only begotten.
That's right. Christ is natural Son.
So essentially, then, what you're saying then is that what Nicaea manages to produce is something which safeguards both the unity of God, and also is able to affirm that the Father is not the Son and the Son is not the Father, and yet both the Father and the Son are God. So it manages to protect the monotheism of Christianity, and also the particularity of the Father and the Son.
Yeah. I mean, some people would say Nicaea hadn't quite done the latter of those two yet. People who were nervous, and Basil of Caesarea is one who explicitly says this, that he's nervous of the language of homoousios unless you also are prepared to talk about the three hypostases or the three personae, prosopon in Greek. Unless you're prepared to talk about three persons or three hypostases. And in fact, he thinks you have to talk about three hypostases and not just three persons, because otherwise it's not clear enough. The distinction between the three is not clear enough. Now, that's later on. But initially, the key point at Nicaea itself is to say Jesus is God in the way that God the Father is God. He has the fullness of divinity. He is true God. And homoousios means he's on a level, he's equal to the Father. And so you're not talking about a subordinate being sent to do the dirty work. You're talking about equality in love through all eternity between the Father and Son and the Spirit. This is added in later on explicitly. I mean, the Nicene Creed just says, and in the Spirit, when talking about belief. And then later on, more clauses were added about what you can say about the Spirit, as we know. But and Nicaea itself, it's the relationship between the Father and the Son, that the Son is true God, the Son is of one being, consubstantial, however you want to translate it, with the Father. And that means that it truly is God who became incarnate, and it truly is divine life that's offered to us as a consequence.
Hmm. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I think we need to wrap up. We've hit a 35-minute mark, and I know that Dan's going to be like watching eagle-eyed, or eager-eyed. What is it? Eagle-eyed, eagle-eyed? Either
Eagle-eyed.
way, whichever one, he'll be doing it. If there is one takeaway from the Council of Nicaea that you think that well, maybe two takeaways. What would you like people to take away from the Council of Nicaea, and what do you think that the church fathers who were there, what do you think they would like listeners to take away from the Council of Nicaea?
Well, I think the Council Fathers, it's easy enough to work out. I mean, at least the ones who actually believed in what they did, as opposed to the ones who signed up because they didn't think they had a choice. Athanasius, obviously, he wasn't a bishop then, he was a deacon, but he was present. What he would want us to take away is the idea that the one who saves us, Christ, is truly God, and that he has the power. He is the power of God. He has the power to confer salvation on us.
Only God can save, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and God does save, and so that we should look to Christ and rejoice. Really, I mean, it's all in on the incarnation. That we just have to look back at the gaze of Christ. We have to catch the loving gaze of Christ, in the incarnation and from the cross, and turn back and adore and be part of it and join the community. So what I would like people to get away, I suppose in a more academic sense, is what a great thing arguments are. What a great thing theological arguments are. I mean, this is the best of all because it's one that most of the churches believe in. There are a few primitive Protestant churches. I mean, primitive Christianity, by the way, is a technical term. I'm not writing them down, but few primitive Christian churches that don't believe in Nicaea. But the biggest group of churches that believe in any council believe in the Council of Nicaea, and it actually unites us to the Coptic and Ethiopic churches, to the Church of the East, what's sometimes called the Nestorian Church, to all the different post-Nicene groups, even the ones that deny Chalcedon, they still accept and revere Nicaea. So there's all that. It's got ecumenical possibilities which are way beyond any of the other councils, really. So keep talking about Nicaea is really what I would want people to do. And if you don't know anything about it, read more, because the discussions are endless, but so is theology, and that's what we're called to do. We're called to endlessly discuss God. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully I'll be able to get you back on to talk about some of the other councils, because of course people talk about the Council of Nicaea as being the Council of Nicaea, but of course there is also Nicaea too.
Yes, that's very
let's
interesting.
call it the return of Nicaea.
Yeah.
When Nicaea strikes back.
Well, that's quite a different council, but as I think I've mentioned to you before, that's really the council where your theology of our all being saints, called to be images of God ourselves, really comes from Jonathan
Wonderful.
Matthews.
And hopefully one day I will read about that council. There are 5 councils in between. I think you also told me there are 5 councils in between Nicaea 1 and Nicaea 2. So yeah, hopefully we'll be able to get you back on and talk about some of the other councils, highlights of the councils and things, to broaden people's understanding and appreciation of the great rich tapestry of our theology.
Great.
And see how things develop. So can't wait to hear what happens next. Excellent. Excellent.
Well,
Well,
tune
thank
in
you
for
very
read
much.
my book when it comes out next year.
Yes, yeah. Well, I look forward to a copy. I want a copy. I
Oh
want it.
yes,
I want to get it inscribed. I'm gonna get your inscription. Thank you very, very much. And
thank you.
yeah, we'll do this. We must do this again sometime. And
Excellent.
I'm actually seeing you later on this week. I'm flying. I'm at the moment. I'm studying in Rome, and I'll fly back and see Sara. Provincial promoter of the lay Dominicans on my part. And so anyway, yes, I
Excellent.
look forward to
Look
seeing you
forward to
then.
that too.
And yeah, I'll see you soon. God bless.
Okay. God bless. Bye bye.
Bye.